The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. 1591. Don't interfere with system functions. Lex breathed a sigh of relief once everything was done. Although he paid for the event and set things in motion, nothing happened for now. Instead, this particular event, involving the system users, would only kick off after the current event was over. There was another issue, however, that Lex could not figure out, though he could venture a guess or two. How was it possible for hundreds or thousands of system users to come into the inn, yet they caused no trouble whatsoever? Was it because they had come to the inn as security through the event panel? Unlikely. If he could get around his system's rules, he didn't doubt others could as well. The only thing he could think of was that the 10,000 metric tons he spent played a role in keeping them in line, or that their own systems forced them to obey the Midnight System's rules when they were brought here. It was likely a combination of both. Mary, tell John that I have good news for him and bad news. The good news is that it is unlikely these system users will misbehave while they're here, so he doesn't need to worry. The bad news for him is, I now have a list of names of countless system users. Finding them in the origin realm, and then tracking them to do his evaluation will be his job, so his resting days are likely over. While he sounded nonchalant, Lex was actually quite concerned, as the presence of so many systems exposed a huge security risk to himself. If anyone else tracked system users, for example a certain mysterious organization linked to 2 rhino centaurs, then the chances of the inn being exposed were great. Mary, between you and me, all the system users came through the system and are acting as security. Isn't that a huge risk to us as a system? Won't they get hints that the inn is a system? I know at least that Celestial has acted as a bodyguard at the inn before. I think, rather than you, it is a greater risk to those who have come to your inn, Mary said. They have had all their identities exposed to you, and you can do something shady to them at any time you want, like sending John to spy on them. Lex paused for a second, admitting that yes, his actions were definitely pretty shady. On a serious note, according to the information I received through the system, hiring security through the event panel counts as an automated feature of the inn. That means that sufficient safety protocols have been put in place, not only for you, but for those hired as well. If you try to interfere in this somehow, just to say if you try to interfere with how the meditation room operates, there will be pretty severe repercussions, not to mention that this automated function might stop operating altogether. Using proper tools like the room alteration feature is different, but if you forcefully try to interfere with the system's operations, the system will react in some way. It might punish you, or more likely than not, give you an extremely challenging quest that you will regret. That sounds harsh. I've been using loopholes in this system for years. How come nothing bad ever happened as a result of that? Using a loophole and directly interfering with how a system operates one of its features are not the same thing. Point being, it's unlikely that the security team will act against you, and should you somehow try to harm or take advantage of them, then the system will not let it be. However, once the event is over, I don't think the system will judge either your or the other's actions, so that's something to watch out for. Lex did not respond. Despite assurances, the point remained that he was not more exposed than ever. There was no point in sitting and crying about it. The best thing he could do to protect himself was something he was already doing, growing stronger and making his system more effective and versatile. Tell John to find me the best scouting tools he can find with the rhino centaurs, Lex said, not trying to somehow use the availability of thousands of system users to gain access to their unique items. Many of them, he noticed, willfully traded some lesser valuable items for trade within the gift room or the guild room. It was too risky letting so many system users know that he was aware of their systems. He would much rather wait till his plan was set into motion after the event, and then one by one see if any of them had anything that could help his situation. We found a solution, Cayman said, alerting Lex to their progress. Crossing the purple liquid shouldn't be too much of an issue. As soon as the ships are prepared, we'll head out. Let me lend a hand, said Lex. I have a bit of experience building treasures myself, and I can make a ship for the staff from the inn as well. Putting the matter of the system users aside for now, and ignoring the smoke still blowing out of his head, Lex began to work on building ships strong enough to help them cross the purple liquid. Meanwhile, within the inn, John regained his composure the moment Mary told him that the innkeeper had everything under control. In fact, in the future, John would be going to go investigate many of the system users present at the inn. John chided himself for his amateurish reaction. Of course, the innkeeper would know who was inside his inn, and have everything under control. He made his way to the rhinocentaurs, and immediately tasked them with finding him the best and most versatile scouting equipment they could. He did not tell them what it was for, nor did he tell them about how they were surrounded by system users despite getting the equipment from them in the first place. Instead, he started to think about that new cultivation technique Mary gave him an idea for. As the owner of Battle Axe, making a custom technique was exactly his forte, so this should be easy, right? 1592 Get the hell out of here. A raft really is good enough, said the helpless mercenary as he saw Lex putting in unnecessary effort and energy in designing the vessel they would use to cross the liquid. You really don't need to do all this. Trust me bro, said Lex as he molded hardwood under his arms as if it was clay. Where I'm from, it's all about the arcs. You're going to be saving a bunch of people and crossing a body of water? Then you gotta go with an arc for a design. It's like giving up free good luck if you don't. Luck is just a derivative law of karma, and I'm not so sure it has anything to do with vessel design, the mercenary said reluctantly. Don't worry about it. I'm the one putting in the extra work, so why are you so stressed? Lex asked. As he ran his hand over the wood, shaping it into the outer frame of the arc, he was also imbuing it with various techniques, preparing it for the final outcome. There would be 2 arcs, one for the mercenaries and one for the tavern, and for the sake of effectiveness, both of them would be identical in design and function. After nearly frying his brain, it was good to work with his hands and do something simple, like design the ship that would have to face the elements, the locusts, and anything else that Abaddon had to throw at them, and survive long enough to get them across the body of purple hallucinogenic liquid. As it turned out, high temperatures burned the vapors of the liquid straight out of the air, so the best protection would just be a heated barrier separating the inside and outside of the vessel, keeping them safe. Of course, the ship would also have to tolerate locust attacks as well, so it couldn't be flimsy. It would also be best if it enabled those on it to fight easily if it was required. With that in mind, Lex quickly designed and built 2 arcs using the wood from the trees on the island they were on. It didn't take nearly as long as the mercenaries feared it would take, mostly because Lex was quite skilled in making relatively simple treasures using extremely valuable materials. True, if someone else more skilled did it, they would be able to get more out of the same materials than Lex. But his own skill was good enough that no one could complain, either. With the vessels ready, everyone got into position, and Lex finally deactivated the castle. The castle shrank, returning to its form as a snow globe, leaving everyone exposed once again. The mercenaries were more than ready to face the locust armies up ahead, but those from the inn had to be more strategic about it. Originally, Lex had planned to immediately have everyone use the battalion formation that allowed them to transform into a mech. But since they would immediately be entering the arc, which they would need to control anyway, that was unfeasible. That meant that, for now, the weakest and most vulnerable of the workers were in the center, while the rest surrounded them. In fact, Fenrir even used his ability on the weaker staff workers to make them less visible. The problem was that Fenrir's ability was more suited to individuals than armies, so the more people there were, the less effective it would be. In their situation, the best it could do was make them less likely to be targeted. Everyone was already in position before the castle was withdrawn, so the moment it disappeared, the 2 groups started to move. They cut through the locust armies, focusing more on pushing them aside and moving forward than killing them. The inn, too, had numerous members who could have wrought absolute havoc, but doing such a thing would be a waste of energy. It had already been decided that they would move in the most efficient way possible, which required dividing the work up over a large group, and doing only what was absolutely necessary. Killing an additional locust would not help them at all, so they all restrained themselves. Z, along with Leonidas, led the inn through the locusts, following the mercenaries closely. It barely took a couple of minutes before they reached the purple liquid, and the two armies summoned their arcs and quickly boarded. The arcs didn't actually float in the water, flying just over the liquid itself. That didn't stop the locusts within the liquid from going into a frenzy and attacking the arcs in a craze. But the staff, even the weaker ones, were extremely professional and showed not a hint of fear. They immediately spread out throughout the arc, activating its many formations that relied on numerous people to run. The first wave of locusts was instantly repelled, and the vapors of the purple liquid seemed unable to affect them at all. "See, what did I tell you?" Lex yelled over to the other arc, a wide smile on his face. "Using an arc is good luck." Before he could get a response, though, a clap of thunder shook the skies itself, as if a sign of divine retribution. The clear, red skies of Abaddon seemed like they were almost instantly covered in black clouds with ferocious lightning beasts flying through them, all glaring at the arcs. The locusts, too, as if invigorated by the weather, resumed their attack on the arcs, hungry for the souls on board. Lex felt as if he personally was being targeted. This wasn't a complaint. It was his ability. He could see that Abaddon was specifically targeting him for reasons he did not understand. Before he could come to a proper conclusion about why he was being targeted, a storm began. It started with a single drop of rain, an insignificant drop of water, falling alone in the vast heavens. But what followed was not more water. Instead it was hail, all of it seething with a devilish hunger, as if the hail itself craved their souls. Oh, and the hail was the size of a land cruiser, or rather, 48,344 hamburgers. 1593. But first, let me take a selfie. The change was abrupt, yet it did not catch the two groups by surprise. While the primary function of the two arcs was transport, Lex had naturally paid close attention to its defensive capabilities as well. It was nowhere near the same scale as the castle, for the ingredients used to make it were valuable on a universal level. But at the same time, it was nothing to scoff at either. Lex had strengthened the wood as well, making it as durable as possible, while outfitting the ships with the best and strongest defensive formations. He even took advantage of the fact that there would be numerous immortals on each ship, using formations that would rely on countless people to fuel and run it. This was normally a disadvantage to most formations, as the more people needed to operate it, the greater it would be considered a flaw, despite making the formation easier to implement and stronger in function. Yet on a transport vehicle, where countless people would already be present, it was silly to not take advantage of their numbers. The hail crashed into the ark's protective barriers, shattering as it did, causing a reverberating boom in the open air. That was the effect of only a single hailstone, with countless more falling each second. If there was one advantage the hail afforded, it was that the locusts also suffered from them. But Lex did not take that as a good sign just yet. Over the past few weeks, he had heard Cayman's experiences in detail, and knew that nothing was ever simple here. He focused all his attention on the hail and immediately noticed something he had missed. The hail was sentient, and filled with the same insatiable hunger that filled the locusts, so when they shattered their own bodies on the protective shields, they left behind a residue of some sort. Lex had been learning a lot about various energies, but it was impossible for him to learn about all of them so quickly, and so he could not identify what that residue was, exactly, but he knew it was some kind of energy, and it was accumulating quickly over the protective shield. His instincts warned him not to let that energy contaminate him, or anyone else on the ship, or they may not survive uninjured. "Energy reserves are depleting faster than expected," exclaimed one of the staffers maintaining the shields. "We won't be able to maintain this for more than a couple minutes." Lex thought of multiple ways to resolve the issue, but he took no action just yet. Instead, he simply watched as Z managed the situation. 250 people were required to maintain the formation at any time, and at the current rate of energy drain, even if those people were swapped, they would not be able to maintain shields for more than 10 minutes. The pressure was building, and the thunderous roar of hail did not help to ease the situation. With everyone looking towards Z to resolve the problem, a hint of panic flashed through his mind. Just as he was about to panic, he noticed something through his spirit sense. The skies above were raging and the purple liquid below had turned into a death trap of its own, its surface a chaos of heaving swells and crashing waves. The locusts had gone unhinged from their hunger, and the hail was like a ravished beast, harming itself just to get at them. The shield was fading and many workers were turning pale, not from fear but from energy drain. It seemed like they were a hair's breadth away from death and destruction, yet amidst all the chaos, Lex stood still, his hands peacefully held behind his back, his eyes a deep well of stillness and calm. It was as if even if the universe itself were to end, it would not cause a stir in those eyes. A silent confidence exuded from his body as if with a single hand he could hold up a collapsing sky, and with his other hand he could preserve an imploding world. All the doubt suddenly vanished from Z's mind, and hesitation left his body. What did he have to fear? Even though his unreliable boss was just that, unreliable, it was only in terms of workers' rights. He would never let them come to harm. Even if this were a test for Z, what was the worst that could happen? At most, he would just fail. With Lex there to back him up, he did not think the consequences of failure would be so dire. After all, wasn't the point of all this to train him in a safe environment, so that when he faced a dangerous environment on his own, he was ready? Determination filled Z's mind and he dithered no longer. Leonidas, get the battalion to attack the hail. Don't let even one touch the shields. Luther, turn up the heat. I think those hallucinogens are getting in and causing everyone's minds to waver. Jeffrey, go make me a club sandwich. I just realized I forgot to have breakfast in the morning. As Z began to pass out orders, the chaos of confusion quickly abated, and though everyone moved with urgency, there was no sign of panic anywhere. There was only one person who was stationary throughout, and that was Lex. Z was making a few mistakes, and he had not noticed that foreign energy, whatever it was, either. But, for now, he was managing well. He assumed that this is probably what Mary felt like looking at him when he started out with a system, constantly making obvious and stupid mistakes. Yet experience was the best teacher, and it was something everyone had to go through. Taking a step back and observing everything also allowed him to spend more time detecting issues and thinking of solutions. It seemed like things in Abaddon were targeting him, and he doubted it was because he had a system. He wasn't silly enough to believe it was just main character syndrome either, where everything was just targeting him because, well, it was him. Instead, he started to detect hints as to the real cause. Now, it would be too coincidental for it to be karma-related. After all his karma problems started to come just as he started to learn about karma. If that was the case, even he would start to think something was up. But Lex had another theory. It was that he always had a karma problem, it was just that he was noticing it now. For example, everything in Abaddon was targeting him because he had overwhelming positive karma. If he could learn to mask it somehow. Before doing any of that, however, Lex pulled out his Polaroid and posed so that Z and the Ark would be visible in the background. He didn't take any pictures during his vacations, but it wasn't too late to start now. 1594 loophole failure. In the end, Lex's help wasn't required. Between Z and Luther, they handled the situation well enough and there were no casualties, though there were a few minor injuries. The hailstorm did not last long, and dissipated just as abruptly as it appeared. In the end, no one was able to determine what that foreign energy was, or what exactly it did, though it did become abundantly clear that it somehow enhanced the strength of the hail. However, when Z noticed the energy, he used the effect of his bloodline to manipulate the energy into entering into various tools before discarding them. But the hail was far from being their last obstacle. A number of locust kings emerged from the purple liquid just as they were about to leave, and assaulted the arks. Much to Lex's dismay, the arks did not make it, though the groups were close enough to land that they could escape. Even pushed to that point, Lex did not personally make a move, though it was only due to the proximity to land that he stayed his hand. Back on land, attacked by numerous locust kings as well as regular locusts themselves, those from the Midnight Inn immediately formed a mech using their battle formation. Looked through a certain lens, they just made themselves into a bigger target. But what's more important was that to harm even one of them was infinitely harder now, not to mention that the mech itself was incredibly powerful. The mercenaries also showed their worth, not only successfully resisting the attack of the kings without suffering a single loss, they even pushed them back and counterattacked. It was not for nothing that they had survived for so long. Lex, of course, did not join the mech, and simply continued to watch. At the same time, John finally started to buy items that the rhino centaurs bought. The rhinos, financed through the inn, had tremendous buying power. Yet that buying power was limited to the lower and weaker members of their group chat, as the more senior members had no need for money. The inn's actual resources could possibly have attracted more powerful users of the group, but that would create a direct trail to the inn Lex didn't want to establish. Sending the items to Lex required the use of, yet another, loophole in the system, or rather in the gift shop. At least, that's what Lex had initially planned. Lex had a system inventory where he could store things, but the premise was that he could only store things that were given to him by the system. However, things he bought from the system for gift shop automatically entered his inventory, since they were technically being given to him by the system. That is why, whenever he used to buy a bought lamb due for the gift shop in the old days, he could immediately pull it out and use it wherever he was. There was a tiny loophole that Lex had discovered wherein, if he bought something from the gift shop, he could put that in his inventory as well. He had planned on putting the items collected by John, putting them in the gift shop, buying them immediately, and then pulling them out of his inventory. Except, it didn't work. The issue was not that he was an Abaddon. Rather, it was that as the system slowly repaired itself, it had begun to address the many obvious flaws in its operations. Even if Lex never gave the system any resources, in a few tens of thousands of years, the system would be able to repair itself completely. It seemed that at some point, without Lex noticing, the system had begun to fix its many loopholes. The timing couldn't have been worse, for Lex suddenly had no way to deliver the items to himself. Just as Lex was thinking of ways to remedy the situation, for he really needed something to help him speed up his search in Abaddon, the deathmatch event in the inn finally ended. A Henali representative gave an announcement, officially declaring the end of the war between the fiery mammoths and the humans, awarding the galaxies of the prior to the latter. To ensure there was no issue, the Henali would personally oversee the transition. This was one of the ways in which they kept the peace within the Origin realm. As the event ended, a majority of those who came to watch the fights left, though the inn was still crowded with far more people than before. Along with the departure of the guests came the departure of the security. This was one of the shortest events Lex had hosted, especially considering the amount of money he had spent. In fact, Lex himself remained unaware of the full repercussions of what he had done. Within the inn, John noticed that the number of system users his device was detecting drastically dropped, but did not return to zero. Outside the inn, countless system users returned to where they came from, and had their memories wiped of the task that they had performed. Originally, everything was as it should have been. Until it wasn't. The Celestial, the one who was cultivating Mo's blessing, suddenly took out an item he had received from a prior quest. Exception token. A token that allows the user to legally and lawfully break a system rule once. As soon as he used the token, his memories of the task he had undertaken suddenly returned to him. The Midnight Inn, huh? He muttered to himself, his thoughts unknown. Elsewhere in the Origin realm, a system user was to return to the location he came from. Yet his prior location, which was a prison, no longer existed. The immediate vicinity was also unsuitable for his return, for it was right between two black holes collapsing into each other. So, according to the system's rules, he was teleported to the closest public area where he was permitted to enter, that was also safe. As such, he managed to avoid the certain death imprisonment that had been specifically designed to contain him. Countless seemingly insignificant such events happened with thousands of system users who returned, the consequences of such events as of yet unknown. However, among the many system users who returned, and successfully completed their quests, there was a number of them who had an additional, unexpected notification. Chapter 1595. Hargreaves was officially a rank 2 wizard and a part of the Prometheus Empire, the largest and most dominant force in the universe. Or at least, that's what the Empire stated in its slogans. With almost 40 rank 6 wizards, and 3 rank 7-8 wizards as the heads of the Empire, it was tough to see how anyone could compete with them. Hargreaves had no reason to doubt them either. Countless wizarding organizations frequently colonized new worlds that they discovered, enslaving its inhabitants and turning the planet into farms. Planets that could not support life were mined and harvested for their resources to the last grain, till they ceased to exist, while planets that did support life were the ultimate source of life energies that many wizards needed, so this was a booming business. It was said that it was basically impossible to become a rank 5 wizard without harvesting at least one world whole, and even more impossible to become a rank 6 wizard without harvesting hundreds. Born without any backing, or talent for that matter, Hargreaves was destined to never move past being a wizard's apprentice. That is, until he got the cultivator in a wizarding world system. Everything changed after that. While it seemed like he was a rank 2 wizard, in truth, he was a chi training cultivator, and instead of spells and spell models, he used spiritual techniques his system gave him. A cultivator's path seemed a lot easier to him than a wizard's, because he didn't need to create a complicated spell model to advance. He just needed to cultivate. Unfortunately, his theory of cultivators being superior could not be tested, for he had never heard of cultivators in his daily life, nor had the Prometheus Empire ever encountered them. Hargreaves stopped thinking about cultivators. He didn't even know why he was thinking about them and instead turned to his notification from his system about his latest quest. He didn't remember anything from it, but he had a vague feeling that he had enjoyed it a lot. He was going over the rewards and notifications, and everything was as expected, except for the very last notification. Additional reward notification: through fulfillment of unknown criteria, you have become eligible for the privilege of membership into the restricted access tier membership of the Midnight Inn known as Obsidian. To finalize membership, proceed to the Midnight Inn and complete the process. Additional reward: Obsidian Key. Hargreaves withdrew the reward key, and as its name implied, an obsidian-colored, old-fashioned key appeared within his hands. Yet not for even a moment could Hargreaves mistake the key for something mundane. An awesome power, one that demanded respect and reverence, emanated from the key, gripping Hargreaves with its aura alone. The color of the key, the finish of its make, the feel of its touch, all evoked an ominous yet regal feeling, as if they belonged to an ancient power that could not be denied. Normally, Hargreaves was not so easily impressed. After all, he came from an empire that believed itself the utmost in the universe. But if he could only recall his time at the quest, he would know that the mere rank 6 and rank 7 wizards that Prometheus claimed were the peak of power were only equal to Earth and Heaven immortals. Maybe that is why, when he felt the power of the key, even without that knowledge, his innate pride and sense of superiority were suppressed. He knew that he was now in the presence of a force far greater than he could currently comprehend. Just as Hargreaves had received such a notification, countless other system users who had completed their quest at the Midnight Inn received similar notifications. The only thing that they had in common was that none of them reached the nascent soul realm of power, and so their systems were not fused with their souls. When Lex was creating an event for the system users, the actual event itself was simple. It should not have cost an entire MT. After all, 1 metric ton was equal to a trillion MP, and he had hosted the first Midnight Games for a lot less MP than that. Even accounting for the fact that the keys needed to be sent to specific people through untraceable ways, and that none of them were on connected planets, the cost was too high. The real reason setting up the event had cost him 1 metric ton was because he had to set up very special rules for this event. Within the Midnight Inn, far away from the main cities, he carved out a region that was restricted only to the people participating in this specific event. No guests who were not participating could enter, nor could the participants exit. Like this, he created an exclusive zone, differentiating from the common access tier members, or in other words, normal guests. Doing so would create an image of mystery and exclusivity, not just in those who would be participating in the event, but in normal guests as well, who would soon be learning of specific memberships to the Midnight Inn, which offered unknown benefits. He then also had to pay to alter the keys that led to this specific zone, differentiating them from the normal gold keys. The mood and atmosphere of the inn, which was usually calm and pleasant, had been changed to feel more eminent and distinguished. In fact, Lex went far beyond just this, going into the minutest details. All workers who would do shifts in this zone would wear black masks to hide their identities, and all guests who entered had to always be wearing the Clark Kent glasses, to hide their own. All of this was to create an air of mystery. After all, Lex had decided to hijack the system's power structure. When he realized that the systems could control a distinguished force through joint and competitive quests, he was amazed at how someone could harness such immense power without any personal investment. Now, by creating an exclusive membership solely for system users in the inn, he created an environment he could control, wherein system users could interact with one another. It was also a resource he could use to remove systems from any hosts who did not want their systems, not to mention he could offer aid or resources in exchange for having those system users accomplish certain tasks. Now, finding a way to send scouting equipment to him in Abaddon would be the first task he would set up. But it wasn't time for that just yet. Obsidian, the special zone of the inn exclusive for system users, was not so straightforward either. After all, the greater the mystery, the more power he wielded. As such, he had gone to great lengths to dictate just how members within Obsidian would interact with one another, as well as the inn. Oh, and this event would go on in perpetuity. Chapter 1596, Backfire. Stop, I'll take care of this one, Lex said suddenly, stopping not only the Midnight Battalion mech, but the mercenaries as well. Though mere hours had passed in the Midnight Inn, entire days had passed within Abaddon. Up until then, Lex had done nothing except observe and analyze, studying the locusts, and Abaddon itself. Since Lex was particularly talented in space, he noticed something Cayman had missed. All of Abaddon was constantly changing. It wasn't that they were being teleported to other places. Instead, Abaddon itself had the landscape undergoing serious change. The only thing was, the change happened far out of view, past the horizon. For some reason, their existence acted as an anchor for Abaddon's existence, making it more real somehow, which is why the changes happened far away from them. That is also why individuals were teleported away when they left the group's line of sight. Individuals were not nearly enough of an anchor as the collective, which meant they were far more susceptible to being victims of the change. Lex even felt like that if they all left Abaddon, that it would cease to exist in the way that they view it. Instead, it would be in a state of constant flux. Its existence would become less real, and more abstract. In fact, Lex felt like the rest of Abaddon existed in its abstract state, and only their surroundings were solid. He did not try to understand why or how something like that operated. Instead, he only tried to understand how he could make use of it. After all, if there was no defined layout of their surroundings, then theoretically, it was possible to make it so that the chalice appeared on the horizon regardless of where they were. He just had to figure out a way to make that happen. That is one of the reasons why he wanted to fight the particularly odd Locust King flying towards them. The second reason was because hidden within the deranged, hungry Locust King was a well-concealed sentience that reminded Lex of it. The thing that suffered universal rejection and hid in the shadows had found a way to appear in the light, so Lex wanted to see for himself what the big deal was. Also, he didn't want to risk the others. This thing was dangerous, and he couldn't confirm he'd be able to react quick enough if something went awry. He also wanted to take this opportunity to do a few tests on karma. If he could deepen his understanding of it, then maybe he'd be able to mask his own karma better. The two groups looked at Lex concernedly, for this was the first time he had taken initiative to stop them, but he did not explain. Instead, he drew Naraka from its sheath, its mere presence elevating his intent to a higher level, though it didn't quite enter level 4. Not that it mattered. Lex had never been the one to use his level to fight an equal opponent. He'd always been fighting up. A part of him was also focusing on the inn, where his Project Obsidian, as he called it, had already begun. He wasn't sure how exactly the system would deliver the keys, but he'd phrased the general invitation to the various system users. All that he had to do now was wait for them to start coming. Oddly enough, despite the event already starting, no one had come yet. To be fair, due to the variance in the flow of time, Lex had trouble keeping track of how much actual time would probably have passed for the invited guests. When they started to come, he would have to orchestrate their entire experience, so a part of him would need to constantly monitor the place. It was not ideal, especially since he was about to fight, but fortunately he had a lot of attention to spare. Lex was not in the mood to probe, so he attacked the Locust King directly, cutting its body in half with a single cleave of his sword, stumping everyone who was watching. Many of them struggled to leave mere stab wounds in the carapace of a Locust King, yet Lex did not even slow down as he cut it in half. Having strength comparable to, if not greater than a heaven immortal was not for nothing. Through the cut, Lex's sword intent, fueled by his overabundant spiritual energy, bore into the king's body, directly fighting against the hunger that was housed in his body. One might say that killing the Locust King was much too easy, and was kind of anticlimactic. To those people, Lex would say, why would he honestly struggle with an Earth immortal when he could not theoretically fight heaven immortals? Like seriously, it may as well be him fighting a golden core cultivator. That's how big the difference was. Soon, Lex encountered the very thing he was on the lookout for. A small piece of dark red energy was hiding in the body, observing what was happening without retaliating. Lex observed it for a moment, trying to study what it was, yet he could not gain any clues, so he decided to attack. The dark red energy was not strong, nor did it put up a fight. To eradicate it should have been no trouble whatsoever. Yet in his eagerness to learn about karma, Lex did that which he would soon regret. Much like he had done with the first locusts, he used his sword intent as a conduit to try and observe the thing's karma. That's when he hit a wall. Literally, that's exactly what it felt like. It felt like Lex was traveling at the speed of light, and then his body crashed into an indestructible wall, leaving his body as nothing more than splatter. The karma that he had tried to manipulate was too big. Its enormity was entirely incomprehensible to Lex, not that it mattered. The moment Lex tried to manipulate it, his attempt backfired on him. Lex's body exploded in a cloud of blood, leaving nothing behind save a red mist, causing everyone to freeze. Chapter 1597, Every Precaution. Cayman had to practically slap his lips to keep himself from gasping. Although he couldn't say that he knew the full extent of Lex's power, he had an idea of it at the very least. It was suffice to say that he was no pushover, and that if he were to join the Reaving Dread he would be a very high-ranking member. The moment Lex stated he wanted to fight this particular Locust King, Cayman realized that the human had noticed something the others had missed, and so prepared himself just in case the situation became messy. When the human sliced the king in half, Cayman was dumbstruck. But when the human right-out exploded just a moment later, Cayman was absolutely horrified. What made it worse was that throughout the entire exchange, Cayman had sensed nothing amiss, so he had no idea why it had happened at all. To top it all off, the explosion of the body itself was akin to Armageddon. The very ground was vaporized as a large crater formed around the center of the explosion, and the shockwave alone was enough to severely injure them if they hadn't raised their guards. Cayman raised his guard to his utmost, on the lookout for any hidden enemies. The rest of the mercenaries did not react much better than him either. Yet if the mercenaries were shocked, those from the inn were absolutely flabbergasted. The mercenaries had only just begun to get to know Lex while they had already known him for much longer. They knew just how incredibly difficult it was to do any harm to Lex at all, let alone blow up his body. They were not shocked, they were in shock. Their brains froze, for they couldn't comprehend the fact that Lex might have died. Z felt the greatest shock, for he had known Lex the longest. He was also the one to recover the quickest, mostly because he simply didn't believe Lex was dead. Instead, he thought this was a setup. Lex would use this as an excuse to state that he was weakened, forcing Z to feel real pressure as he fought to protect everyone. He'd also learn the lesson to never underestimate the enemy. In truth, Lex was probably sitting somewhere, sipping on a pina colada, watching everything unfold. He was kinda obsessed with that drink. What he didn't know was that Lex's body, soul, and spirit were all fused together. That meant that when his body blew up like that, so did his mind and soul. Lex was caught entirely unprepared for the immense feedback he got from trying to manipulate that thing's karma. It literally felt as if he were an ant trying to stop a carriage wheel with his body. The difference in the weight of their karma was so immense that it did not even need to really try and fight back. The results spoke for themselves. But then again, Lex was no longer an amateur. How could he ever take lightly something that even Tao Lords did not master? Blindly trying to probe his way into understanding karma was like asking for trouble, which is why he had taken many precautions. The existence of Jack, who was currently under the protection of a Tao Lord, ensured that, at the very least, Lex would not die completely. But that was far from enough, for Jack had nothing to do with the system. If something happened to Lex, he would lose the system. Using a clone would be smart, if one ignored the fact that Lex's clones were pathetically weak. There was also the fact that any repercussion as a result of using karma would have ignored his clone entirely, and would have focused on the very center of his being. So, his actual first line of precaution was Naraka. The sword made of Vitaville metal was not so easily destroyed, not to mention all the other incredible ingredients that went into its forging. In fact, the sword barely received a hint of the repercussion, as was proven by the fact that it was still whole. By using the sword as a conduit, he was only indirectly interacting with karma, adding a buffer, not that it seemed to have made a difference. The second, much more effective precaution he took, was the go board in his mind. The go board was linked to him in ways that he did not fully understand, so it was safe to say that it was also very intimately linked with his karma. After all, everything that happened to him affected the board, and things that happened on the board affected him. Of course, Lex was nowhere near skilled enough to divert the incoming influence of karma wherever he wished. He simply kept imagining the go board and his black bead, hoping to use its very existence to divert any possible repercussions from his probe towards them, as much or as little as possible. Naturally, Lex had not expected that the feedback would be so intense that it literally overwhelmed his very being. Even so, his strategy worked. A significant portion of the feedback force was diverted towards the go board, filling an entire layer of the board with a red mist. The mist did not last long, as if filtered by something, but the mere presence of some third, unaffiliated existence within the board spoke of how powerful that force was. Axios, within the Artica realm, was suddenly alarmed by the change. He even felt like this might be the best time to possibly launch a counterattack on Lex, yet he dared not. That mist gave him a very dangerous feeling. He was suddenly very cautious of his unknown opponent. What the hell was that guy doing? That was not the end of his precautions. An abundance of experience in dealing with things above his grade ensured that he went over and beyond, and that very well may have paid off. From keeping his domination subtly active within his body, to unleashing the full might of his tenet, if only on himself, to dealing with the Locust King with the full force he had available, Lex made sure he gave himself every advantage he could. Thus, it was only as a result of his utmost effort that he was destroyed into a mist of blood. Had he not done so, perhaps not even that mist might have survived. Chapter 1598, Z is not impressed. Back when Lex was in the Golden Core realm, much of his survivability depended on his core. Even if his body were turned to mush, as long as his core was unharmed, his energy would be able to flow, and help him recover to his peak state. This was as a result of the unique blend of his body, soul, and spirit. His new form of existence had the benefits of all three, with the only drawback being that more energy would be required to carry out the functions of any one. For example, his body, even as a mortal, had the inherent ability to heal. Souls and spirits all lacked that, though both of those boasted a certain durability in their own way. But bodies did not necessarily always heal completely the way they were before injury, yet souls had an inclination to return to their whole being. Even though they lacked the ability to heal on their own, should someone provide them with healing, the soul would always return to its original state. When that ability was mixed with the body's healing ability, it meant that no matter the injury he suffered, he would be able to heal back to his peak state. It was just that his recovery would take longer, and be more energy-intensive. The mind, or rather the spirit, could neither heal, nor did it have a tendency to return to its original state. However, it was endlessly adaptable and resilient, finding a way, any way, to survive. Initially, that just made Lex tougher. Yet when he transcended from the golden core to the nascent realm, it added a new layer to his survivability. In the golden core, his survival was intimately linked to his core, but in the nascent realm, that changed, and to an extent the ability transferred to his entire being. As long as any part of him survived, he would be able to heal. When he became an immortal, Lex's survivability transcended even that to some extent. Now, as long as a single cell, or even a single speck of his soul survived, he would be able to heal back to his peak state. Yet here is where the versatility of his spirit began to shine. Now, it was not only a single cell from his body, nor merely a speck of his soul from which he could return to whole. As long as there was a remnant thought, because Lex also had the ability, through mind meld, to turn into thought, Lex could recover. As it happened, exerting his tenet could also be done through his tenet, so Lex had a feeling that when he entered the heaven immortal realm, his survivability would go to a whole other realm, one that was linked to his tenet. Regardless, his condition at the moment was nowhere near that bad. Let alone a single cell, there was an entire cloud of blood left of Lex. A cloud of blood also meant a significant amount of his soul was still left, and so was his mind, though admittedly getting blown up did affect his spirit enough to make Lex feel drowsy. Very good, Lex's voice reverberated through the land, his voice a suppressive force on its own, crushing the army of locusts around them, wiping every evidence of their existence. But not good enough. The full force of Lex's tenet was unleashed. Though he did not spread it far and wide, within 100 miles 160 kilometers of where his body exploded, his supremacy was unleashed. Within this territory, all laws halted their ordinary function, and everything fell under the influence of Lex's supremacy, forming a domain. Lex had used a domain once before, though he had been kind of cheating then. 1. Now, though, just the sheer force of his full power allowed him to form a domain, something Earth immortals shouldn't have been able to do. Even now, he felt that the way he was forming a domain was incorrect, and that it was supposed to be formed through some other way. He didn't care. Within his domain, the abominable influence of Abaddon ceased. Within this region, Lex was supreme, and his will dictated everything. The cloud of blood quickly retreated back into a single drop of blood, and then the blood began to expand, slowly turning back into Lex's body the way it was before it exploded. Or at least, that's what everyone originally thought was going to happen. Instead, when Lex's body reformed, there were a few changes that they all noticed. His eyes were different, and looked as though they contained the whole universe. Though, since no one could truly imagine what the whole universe looked like, all they saw was an endless, expansive galaxy that contained everything. The second big change was that glorious inferno, Lex's own version of dragon flames, formed a brilliant cape of bright golden flames. Lex did not unleash domination, rather, his very presence exuded domination, which had seemed to gain a regal element to it, as he were some monarch or leader. His reappearance not only relieved the two armies, it amazed them as well. Yet Lex was not focused on that at the moment. Although he seemed entirely unhurt, and even stronger in fact, the truth was that he was greatly injured. Lex had mastered many healing techniques, but even then, it would take him a long time to recover. If he could continuously stay within the recovery pod, then he guessed it would take him about 3 months at the very least. Yet healing and recovery was a matter he would attend to later. Lex's attention was entirely focused on the last grain of its existence, which faded out the moment he returned, as if it had fulfilled its mission. Lex narrowed his eyes, yet before he could ponder deeply into the matter, his karmic reward for killing something that had a hint of universal rejection arrived. It was just that, compared to everyone else, who only received a little positive karma, what Lex received was like the shining sun compared to a single ember. It was so great that it was visible, and everyone stared in awe as a bright light fell from the heavens, as if crowning Lex a king. Only Z seemed unimpressed. Everyone else was mesmerized. For those who want a reminder, domain is first mentioned in chapter 1247. Chapter 1599, Bright Lights. Instead of feeling happy about the crown of light being placed on his head, Lex felt a headache coming on. For some reason, his abundant good karma was already highly attractive to the various creatures in Abaddon, as far as he could tell. Now, receiving a considerable amount more would obviously make him an even bigger target, which was not ideal. To top it all off, Lex was weakened, and he had yet to figure out what exactly it was. However, the one thing that became abundantly clear was that whatever it was, it had an immensely overwhelming karma associated with it, and killing it would give him an astonishingly large amount of karma. Yet instead of greed, Lex was filled with wariness. For that thing, whatever it was, to have so much karma that just trying to influence it blew up Lex's body, Lex was certain that it was not an earth immortal. In fact, he doubted that even a heaven immortal could have so much karma. Yet, for some reason, both times it had shown up in front of Lex, it had the strength of an earth immortal. No matter what the case was, Lex was wary of it. Unfortunately, it seemed that a confrontation was unavoidable. That meant that before the final confrontation, he needed to understand what exactly was limiting it from displaying all its power, and how could Lex defeat it successfully. So far, it seemed like he would be fine as long as he didn't try to touch its karma. Yet that was too convenient an answer, so Lex didn't entirely believe it. Slowly, Lex withdrew his domain, for keeping it active consumed an immense amount of energy. Lex turned to look at Cayman, and approached him with a single step. It seems we have attracted the attention of some unknown power within Abaddon. This is not a good sign. It's nothing we haven't faced before. Remember in my report when I mentioned encountering a vertical bridge made of gray grass? There was a school of aerial fish using it to fly up into the sky. Well, at that time, something from up above spotted us, and seemed able to break the rule of only being attracted to those on the same level. For things like this, we simply summon the condottiere. He will take care of it. You can summon the condottiere whenever you wish? Lex asked, surprised. Not the real him, just a projection, and he doesn't come every time either. Sometimes, he just resolves the issue without even sending a projection. I will compile a report to him updating him on the situation, and conduct the ritual to contact him. I'll let you know what the update is. Thanks. I won't say no to additional help. This is not an easy job, even without the unnaturally strong and weird beings targeting us. Cayman eyed Lex but said nothing about his use of a domain, and just watched Lex return to the midnight mech. The two groups immediately resumed their march, taking advantage of the rare occurrence of no locusts swarming them to make great progress. The flow of time, though varied within Abaddon, seemed to be going much faster than even the midnight inn, so that multiple days passed by without a single hour passing in Abaddon. During that time, their progress seemed to be great. Although the midnight mech was not directly supporting the mercenaries, who were dealing with the majority of any locusts, its mere presence meant that the pressure on the mercenaries was a lot less. Of course, such progress in Lex's eyes was meaningless. Blindly searching for the chalice meant that they would never find it, so the entire time he kept trying to think of ways to induce the arrival of the chalice. In fact, he even tried to send Fenrir back to the inn, so that he could be summoned back to Lex with the equipment from John. After all, as the protector of the inn, Fenrir was linked to the inn, and through his bond with Lex, he was connected to him. Teleporting the pup to and from the inn was what made him an incredible partner for Lex. Yet when Lex tried to send Fenrir back, Abaddon would interfere with the teleportation, making it fail. It was the first time Lex encountered something like that, though the peculiarity of Abaddon meant that he was not surprised by it. It was then, on the 10th day since Lex's explosion, that something changed. It was not the ever-changing landscape, nor was it the locusts. Instead, the change was in the red sky, which began to turn bright yellow, almost blinding everyone. The mercenaries suddenly stopped their march, and with a solemn expression, summoned Lex. "I think you better establish your castle here once again," Cayman said. "We won't be moving until the sky stabilizes." Lex, who had read a report of all of Cayman's experiences, naturally knew what was happening. Abaddon was a place where a number of dead souls from the universe were pulled in by some unknown power. Yet that pull was not a constant force. Instead, at intervals, when the sky turned purple, an endless number of souls were pulled into Abaddon through the sky, causing immense turmoil and danger. During such times, it was best to absolutely stay still, lest some passing powerful being think that they were competing for the souls. That would spell their certain doom. They had stopped a lot sooner than any of them had expected, but Lex was not one to complain. In fact, stopping was for the best, for he wanted to study the changes occurring in great detail, and through the soul plane. In a matter of minutes, the Midnight Castle was once again deployed, its defenses activated, and the mercenaries had withdrawn to its inner chambers to rest and recuperate. Only the Midnight Battalion stayed on the outer walls, alongside Lex, of course, had returned to his position atop the tallest tower in the castle, from where he observed the changing sky. As he saw the changing colors, he couldn't help but have a random thought. The deep red of the sky as it usually was almost seemed like the inside of a human throat. The deep red was like the inside of the body when a bright light was shone on the skin, revealing the blood and meat within. The bright sky was almost like the mouth had opened, allowing the external light to enter within. Chapter 1600, Feast of Souls. Lex watched the sky that had forsaken its usual deep, blood-colored hue for something far less sinister, yet somehow far more disquieting. A blinding, awful yellow that bled across the heavens like a wound leaking sulfur. It pulsed, not with life, but with hunger. Hunger, that was a theme that never changed in Abaddon, even if the very sky itself had already changed. A soundless scream shattered the air. It did not echo, for it had no origin, only presence. Then, the sky cracked, unleashing even more light into Abaddon. The cracks were not accompanied by thunderous roars. Instead, a deep wailing, the kind that would grip the heart of any who heard it, rang out across the lands each time the crack spread. It was as if the lands themselves were crying at the formation of the cracks, but that could not be. The abominable lands that these were, they would not cry at something horrendous, no. They would instead yelp with joy. The wail, then, must have belonged to the universe itself as something precious to it was being stolen from within. From atop his tower, Lex could sense it. Universal rejection was permeating to all of Abaddon through the cracks, as if these lands themselves were unwelcome in this universe. But whether they were welcome or not hardly mattered. These lands were here, and they were going nowhere. Then the cracks shattered completely, revealing not a gaping hole, as one would expect. Instead, it was almost like a perfectly built door. From within it poured out souls. Hundreds of trillions. Uncountable. Unknowable. Not drifting, but hurled ripped from whatever nameless void or sanctum they once belonged to, and flung into the land below like water from a broken dam. To Lex's eyes, the souls were plainly visible, and he felt a chill in his very core as he saw the flooding in. Each second he saw trillions of souls fall into Abaddon, all of them weakened, frightened or plain delirious. If there was any consolation, if it could be called that, it was that the souls were all mired in a deep black karma, indicating the immense sins that they had committed. They were the kinds of souls one would expect to see go to hell, the kind that was spoken of on earth before the war, where sinful people went to get punished. Yet the punishment these sinners received was not hellfire. It was, somehow, a thing far worse. For with the arrival of the souls, they came. Not with feet, nor wings, nor form. But presence. The land shifted as if the weight of invisible titans had awoken. Ancient and malevolent intelligences, forces that had no names, only hungers, began to stir. Spiritual energy warped, twisted, recoiled as they converged, each trying to grasp the falling essence of the souls, to devour it, to make it theirs. The depth of their auras was such that Lex could not gauge them at all. Surely they were not of the Tao, for sensing that would be enough to cripple Lex entirely. Yet they had a power that even celestial immortals should find unfathomable. Mountains cracked without being touched. Oceans raged beneath still skies. Shadows elongated, twisted, then tore themselves free of the things that had once cast them. In any other place, Lex would have thought that the land was suffering. but he knew better. Abaddon was not suffering destruction. No, it was writhing with glee as the souls poured in and the carnage that followed took place. The air grew impossibly still, dense with dread and power, as if the land itself held its breath. The souls continued to rain down, like a blight, and the forces fought, without sound or shape, clashing in unseen battles so potent that the laws of Abaddon themselves rippled, as though existence were straining to contain what had been unleashed. Beneath it all, Lex stood, small, unmoving, simply watching. Simply, there. For all the power he felt he had when he unleashed his domain days ago, he knew at that moment that he was entirely, pathetically weak to the true horrors of Abaddon. As he silently watched, lost in thought and introspection, a soul brushed past his cheek like a breeze of forgotten sorrow. He had no idea how it got past the defenses of the castle, nor how it suddenly appeared beside him. All he knew was that whatever the world that soul had been from, it had died. It was a strange and random thought. He should have been thinking of how to distance himself from that soul, or how to push it out of the castle. But in truth, there was no need. To the forces that were competing for the souls, the barriers of the castle were no obstacle. As long as he did not actively move to take a soul, he would not be in their competition, and so they would ignore him. Just as he expected, the mutilated soul soon disappeared, sucked away by some entity unknown. Lex could not help but think about how the chalice of the abandoned was probably one of the forces that was sucking the souls out of the sky. How were they supposed to control that? How were they supposed to snatch back a single soul from such a thing? He did not know. The only thing that Lex knew at that moment was that Abaddon really was a land abandoned by this universe. Every single existence competing for souls was receiving an immense amount of universal rejection, but Abaddon itself was protecting them, harboring them. It was as if Abaddon was a parasite to their universe, and at the same time a refuge for countless other parasites. If it were allowed to remain, if it were allowed to grow, then one day it might threaten the whole universe itself. Lex suddenly got another new notification from his system, but at that moment, he was not in the mood to check it out. Instead, he simply silently watched the feast of souls taking place above him, etching it deep into his memories. The feast of souls went on for 4 days without stopping, and the entire time Lex stayed up on that tower. Within those 4 days, they weren't attacked even once, nor did they experience anything unusual. It was as if all of Abaddon was focused solely on the souls, and not a single resident of this abominable land could spare a thought for them, the souls still within their packaging. Lex found it particularly interesting how all the souls, every single one, at least every single one that he managed to see, was that of a sinner. He began to consider, for a moment, if the stories and myths from hell on earth, and countless other civilizations were actually inspired by Abaddon. He also gave more thought to his theory of Abaddon being like some kind of parasite on this universe. Honestly, the thought was quite frightening, for it implied a much greater truth. It implied that there were forces even outside this universe, and some of them were capable of resisting the rules and laws of this universe. After all, so far, according to what Lex had seen, the universe was the greatest power. Not even Tao lords could ignore the laws of the universe, and even the systems obeyed the universal mandates. Even the beings above the Tao lord realm played by the rules of the universe as far as he knew. For example, no one messed with time. Even those who were daring enough to learn about the laws of time did so very carefully, ensuring they did not accidentally break any taboos. Yet the mere existence of Abaddon potentially challenged his views that the universe was the strongest existence. After all, the very existence of universal rejection meant that there were beings or items which could, somehow, resist the influence of the universe and so were basically spurned by the universe. Anyone who destroyed them received rewards from the universe in the form of good karma. It was possible that the rewards went even further than that, and he just hadn't encountered them yet. Honestly, if such a thing proved to be true, he wouldn't be too surprised. It only made sense, after all. There were minor realms and major realms, and all other kinds of realms, all contained within the universe, so why wasn't it possible that the universe too was contained within something greater? But if such a thing were true, then the ramifications of it, honestly, Lex could not fully imagine what the ramifications would be. For example, the entire history of the universe would have to be reassessed. Even Cayman's story about the possibility of a forgotten age might become plausible. Then, it further evoked some questions such as, what was preventing those stronger forces from coming to the universe and taking control? If the strong forces of the universe could treat major realms as nothing more than resources to be controlled for their various benefits, who is to say that a stronger force might not do that to this universe? These questions, if pondered upon for too long, had the potential to give anyone, from a mere mortal to even Tao lords, the possibility of a mental breakdown. To ponder such questions was to face just how powerless one really was. But it did not bother Lex too much. He was still so weak, and was used to feeling powerless. To a large extent, whether there were forces stronger than the universe or not hardly mattered to him, because he couldn't do anything about it. Having said that, Lex had an answer in his heart he believed to be true. After all, he had also been exposed to an array of unusually rare things. He recalled reading the description of the first technique he ever practiced, the regal embrace. A cultivation technique carried by a specific being in the universe as a part of his collection. Regal embrace lets the cultivator build an impenetrable defense which can take head-on attacks even from those at a higher cultivation level. After certain accomplishments in this cultivation technique, the cultivator can stand there and embrace his enemy's attacks. At its highest level, it can allow its cultivator to survive even the destruction of a universe. The answer to this question was present within this description. The regal embrace, which was a technique carried by a specific being, could allow whoever practiced it to survive the destruction of a universe. For a very long time, Lex did not pay attention to the wording, or what it implied. But the answer was right there for anyone who thought about it a little. Regal embrace was likely not a technique from this universe. In fact, it was probably from a force that surpassed the power level of this universe, for it could casually mention the destruction of an entire universe. If one continued to think along those lines, then the cultivation technique was most likely in the possession of a being that surpassed the power of this universe, or at the very least had exited this universe at least once. Of course, it was entirely possible that the owner had just found the technique somewhere, and that the regal embrace, as well as Mo's blessing, both of which talked about the destruction of a universe, had somehow been created within this universe. If that was true, then all of this was nothing but baseless conjecture. Either way, what remained true was that Lex could do nothing with this information for now. It was too far above his level. Maybe when he reached the Tao Lord level, he could think about this. Most likely, even then, he would be too weak to consider it. So, as the mighty powers of Abaddon flexed their proverbial muscles, Lex simply observed silently, trying to understand the order of this place. Just because Abaddon was in a state of flux, ever-changing beyond the horizon, it did not mean that it ceased its functions in such a state. If he could gain some insight into how the powers of this land worked, or what their relationship with each other was, then it might be easier for him to find a solution to their current predicament. When the 4 days passed, and the feast finally ended, the bright lights above Abaddon finally faded, returning to the deep crimson that they were all used to. During this time, while Lex was unable to discern even the slightest hint of how Abaddon actually functioned, he had multiple theories about the relationship between some of the powers residing here. Cayman, do you know any way we can discover one of the ruins you mentioned earlier? Lex asked the magma lion once the soul feast finished, and they readied for departure. According to their experience, Abaddon was most peaceful right after the soul feast, so they could travel great distances during this time. Of course, in Abaddon one could not judge the future based on past experiences, so they were still ready to face any unexpected problems. Well, there is a particular set of ruins that have their entrance hidden behind waterfalls. No matter what waterfall we discover, the entrance to those ruins is hidden behind it, so all we need to do is be on the lookout for waterfalls. Why are you asking? If you're interested in completing the tasks for the knowledge of the ruins, I advise against it. Based on everything we've seen, the ruins are, at best, a burden on the mind, and at worst some kind of mental plague. Like I told you earlier, all of us that learned of the Forgotten Age are unable to overcome the weight of that knowledge, even if we want to. It's not that I'm greedy for knowledge, Lex said somberly, finding it harder than usual to return to his cheery self. It was likely because his spirit was still damaged from when he blew up. I have some theories about Abaddon that I want to test out. If they turn out to be true, then I might be able to find the chalice much quicker. Cayman had no real reason to object, so they decided to be on the lookout for waterfalls. Before they left, though, Lex finally turned to look towards the system notification he had been avoiding for a few days now. He had strong suspicions about what it was really about. Quest update, optional objective: discover the secrets of Abaddon, partially updated. It is possible Abaddon is a parasitic entity from a foreign universe. Find evidence of Abaddon's origins to prove whether or not it is a foreign entity. Optional quest reward: upon discovering the origins of Abaddon, the host will be able to unlock Lore Book, which can forever record true secrets of the universe. Lore Book is independent of the system, but can be placed and integrated with any system the owner of the book desires, and can be withdrawn at any time. Chapter 1602, Do You Want Some Candy? Whether it was due to depressive mood in Abaddon, where countless souls had just been devoured by numerous abominations, or as a result of his injured spirit, Lex did not experience much of a reaction to the system notification. It was good to know that his theories were plausible enough to receive acknowledgement from the system. At the same time, the fact that it didn't confirm that this was the truth, and that the system still required verification, was also reassuring. Either way, it made no difference to his reality right then and there. Maybe that's why he didn't have much of a reaction. A lore book might be interesting, but at the moment he did not understand why he might want to record the secrets of the universe. Perhaps the reason he was subdued was because without entering a recovery pod, his healing process would take well over a year. He couldn't afford to stay weak, but he also hadn't wanted to miss the opportunity of missing out on the soul feast. The best he could do for now was use a healing technique on himself and reduce his own exertion. When he told Z that he would focus on healing, he seemed to roll his eyes. Lex, of course, was aware of what he was thinking. At least he was aware of Z's theory of Lex being a demi-Dao lord. The problem was, if Lex denied it, Z would believe it even more. If he didn't deny it, then Z would continue to behave this way, and that might lead to misunderstandings. Ultimately, he just decided to ignore it. They withdrew the castle back into the snow globe, and the mech once again came to life, following the mercenaries as they quickly marched through the empty land. The deafening silence was eerie, and the absence of any locusts made Abaddon somehow seem even more desolate than it usually felt. Lex gave the land one last look, taking in how mundane even an accursed land could look, before closing his eyes and circulating a healing technique, beginning his healing. A faint, multicolored bubble formed around Lex, forming a protective barrier between him and everything outside. Seated cross-legged on the shoulder of the mech, Lex subdued his consciousness, losing his sense of the passage of time. Of course, that was only true for most of his consciousness, but not all of it. On an almost subconscious level, he maintained his awareness of the inn, where he was expecting system users to enter Obsidian at any time. His connection to Jack was also present, but considering how Jack himself was confined to a room while he traveled to the Artica realm, there was not much stimulation there. To top it all off, the ever-changing flows of time between his many awarenesses made it so confusing that as he entered his deep, meditative state, it was almost as if his consciousness had completely gone dormant. Hours, days, maybe even weeks or months passed by Lex, but he remained unaware. While he healed, the armies marched through the lands, searching now for ruins as well as the chalice. As promised, the first week after the soul feast passed by quietly. It was only after a week that they stumbled onto a small clan of feral ladybugs that they once again had to battle. The presence of the ladybugs, they probably weren't actually ladybugs, considering each of them was the size of 3.5 kayaks and had 3 mouths, was highly unexpected since they lacked the distinct hunger which was common in Abadonian creatures. They were still highly hostile, so they were killed either way. Their blood contained highly concentrated vitality, and would be like a miracle elixir for anything below the immortal realm, and a pretty decent healing elixir for those in the immortal realm as well. When that was discovered, not a single one of them was left alive, and each one of them was hunted down. But that was not the end of their unusual encounters. Soon after that, they encountered a mutated ant colony, attracted by the scent of the ladybugs. Cayman had already encountered a number of other creatures in Abaddon, so he wasn't too surprised by the presence of other creatures, though the absence of the hunger was noteworthy. The fight with the ants was far from easy, and the Midnight Mech had to join forces with the mercenaries to ensure they suffered no excessive injuries. It didn't help that the ants grew stronger based on whatever they ate, allowing them to infinitely grow stronger. Some of them even had some pretty unique powers. It was almost as if the ants came directly out of some relatively popular comic books about hunters, or leveling up alone or something. Weird. But the weirdness did not end there, for over the days the armies kept encountering more and more insects as they went. What's more, for the first time since they'd entered this realm of wandering stone and nonsense geometry, where the terrain had twisted and reshaped itself with no rhyme or reason, the trees suddenly grew upright. Roads curved with reason. Hills sloped like they ought to. Paths followed gravity. The chaos had paused, and in its place was logic. It was coherent. And that, in Abaddon, was deeply unnatural. This continued until the natural day cycle of Abaddon was coming to a close, and evening was beginning to set. The crimson sky was turning sanguine, and a sense of hunger began to pervade the very air. That's when they noticed, in the distance, an ever-stretching verdant jungle. The trees were towers, stretching directly high up into the sky, with thick bushy leaves that created a thick crown. Even from miles and miles afar, the jungle radiated a thick aura of vitality so rich that it awoke Lex from within his bubble, almost startling him. Such an obvious display of life was almost sacrilege in a place like this. "Have you encountered something like this before?" Lex asked, even though he knew the answer already. No, I haven't," the magma lion answered, unbothered by the visage. "I can, however, tell you that whatever is in there, it's been directly pulling us towards it, or we'd have never found it so easily. The terrain has been far too constant for it to be anything else. So there's a bunch of life here as well, and that's created a very large anchor point in Abaddon where the environment doesn't change," Lex theorized. "And whatever is in there somehow pulled us in. I have no evidence to base this on, but there's a possibility they want to pull us in to strengthen their anchor which solidifies Abaddon around them." "Pretty much. But there's one very big problem with this theory. I'm sure I don't need to point it out." "Yes. It's that such a big jungle, brimming with countless souls, is the greatest bait for anything and everything within Abaddon. So either they have some way of resisting the attacks, or there's something seriously wrong with that jungle." Silence followed, since all of them were pretty much thinking the same thing. If they so wished, they could turn around and head the other way. There was a chance that they could avoid the jungle. There was just one issue with that: they had no idea whether or not the chalice was in the jungle, and the only way to find out was to enter it in the first place. "I don't know if I need to point this out, but there's one more issue we'll face if we go to the jungle," said Lex. "I understand. The creatures in the jungle won't obey the same rules as the creatures of Abaddon. If we go in, we may face heaven or even celestial immortals," responded Cayman. "There's no rush to make a decision. I think we should complete our ritual to contact the condottieri first, and then we can make a decision." The two, one man and one magma lion, stared at the jungle ominously, their brooding stare infecting the rest of the two camps as well. Mr. Lex, sir," came an oddly childish voice, whispering in Lex's ear through his spirit sense. For a moment, Lex was stunned, for he had never heard that voice before and didn't know who it belonged to. Then he realized that Little Blue was talking to him. "Mr. Lex, sir, I don't mean to bother you or anything, but there's a very yummy snack in that jungle up ahead, and there's a big fat guy asking me if I want candy. I really want that yummy candy, but I don't know if I should respond to him. What do you think I should do? I feel a Mrs. Big Fat Guy in the forest inviting me as well." Lex turned his neck, and then turned to look at the mech oddly. Little Blue was a part of the formation making up the mech, so he couldn't directly be seen, but Lex could imagine what he looked like while speaking. "I have an idea," Lex suddenly said to Cayman. Chapter 1603, FOMO. Just a little over 800 football fields away from the jungle, the Midnight Castle was deployed. Although the arrival of night was a full week away, and the mercenary group hadn't initially planned on stopping during the night either, it would be foolish not to take every advantage that the Midnight Inn's presence provided them with. The fact that they had deployable, reliable fortifications made this job easier by many orders of magnitudes for the mercenaries. They took each and every opportunity to stop and take a rest that they could get, not to mention that they were playing some kind of role-playing game with the three mischievous beasts from the inn. The existence of the tavern also allowed the mercenaries to do things they weren't able to previously, such as being able to study their destination. Through the use of clones and drones, they had been able to confirm that even if they lose line of sight, within the vicinity of the jungle, individuals won't be teleported away. This meant that they could do something they hadn't done in Abaddon ever before: scouting. They could also deploy advance parties for stealthy infiltration instead of directly marching through the forest and fighting everything in sight. So from within the safety of the castle walls, Cayman, Lex and a few others planned out what to do. It was odd. Lex was used to handling everything by himself. Even now, he half expected to venture into the highly suspicious jungle by himself, uncover its secrets, foil some ancient plot that threatened to destroy the universe and... Okay, on a realistic note, he just thought he was the most versatile one in the group, and would do a good job scouting. Yet it turned out his help wasn't actually needed, possibly even leaving him time to rest in the recovery pod. Lex kept looking around the conference room, expecting something to pop up that would require his help, or for him to step in personally, but it never happened. It was almost as if the whole universe did not rely solely on him, and every issue did not revolve entirely around him. Filled with trace amounts of hesitation and doubt, Lex eventually concluded the meeting as he went over the decisions that they made. They would observe the jungle from a distance for about a day, and after that Little Blue, Fenrir and a mercenary named Malfoy would sneak into the jungle to explore the strange calling Little Blue felt. All of them came to a conclusion that the reason they were able to encounter this jungle now, but the mercenaries had never seen nor heard any sign of it for years, was because of the presence of Little Blue. Clearly it had some connection to the forest, though the exact reason for that connection was a matter of speculation. With everything decided, Lex was left with nothing to do save getting in the recovery pod, while Little Blue, Fenrir and Malfoy geared up to go outside. Malfoy kept giving Fenrir distrustful looks, and seemed ready to protect Little Blue no matter the cost. In the meantime, the rest of the mercenaries started the ritual to contact the condottiere. A day passed uneventfully at the castle, though they observed a lot of movement within the jungle. It seemed that all sorts of insects called the place home. The thing that all of them shared in common was that they were all pack insects, preferring to move in teams rather than by themselves. That presented many difficulties and opportunities of its own. Eventually, once the time was up, the three of them set out. "Do not think you can get away with trying anything suspicious," Malfoy said to Fenrir the moment they exited the castle. "I have activated Dread Protection. The gifts of the Reaving Dread mercenary group go far beyond what you can imagine. At even the slightest whiff of betrayal, I can eviscerate you." Fenrir growled at Malfoy, as if threatening him, but Little Blue suddenly spread its wings, unleashing some of its power, which cowed the pup. Malfoy snorted, and turned away from him. He knew that the Protector was too kind to deal with his own twin brother, but Malfoy would never risk their mission over something like that. That's why he didn't hesitate to use his ability, which would punish anyone who betrayed him, since technically they were on the same team. He'd understood by now that it wasn't that the entire Midnight Castle was an illusion, but that the twin brother had been corrupted by Abaddon. They had to hide their powers usually from the caretaker, Lex, but when he wasn't around, they would unleash their true selves. Oddly enough, however, his ability to punish traitors informed him that the brothers actually had full and complete loyalty towards each other, and would never harm one another. He hadn't yet decided if that was a trick, or if they still had remnants of who they were still stuck deep within. It seemed that the Protector really might be able to redeem his brothers and save them from eternal damnation of being a Reddit mod, whatever that meant. Fenrir activated his ability, which allowed the three of them to become hidden, undetectable by most, so that they could finally enter the jungle. It took them only a few seconds to reach the jungle, and after making sure there was no trouble, they entered. As soon as they entered the jungle, Lex, who was sleeping within his recovery pod, suddenly opened his eyes. The exact moment they entered the jungle, the flow of time between Abaddon and the Midnight Realm became equal. Up until now, Abaddon had been going much faster than the Midnight Realm. With this change, however, time would flow equally. As a result, only a few seconds later, Lex got his first visitor in Obsidian. Lex gave a deep look towards the jungle. It seemed like he would need to visit it after all to explore its secrets. He was not saying that just because he had severe FOMO, fear of missing out. After a moment's deliberation, he managed to keep himself from sneaking into the forest, instead deciding to wait until Fenrir returned with his report. In the meantime, he diverted his attention back towards the inn. Chapter 1604, Zen Garden. Obsidian was unlike the rest of the inn, where the architecture was grand and lively. No, to emphasize on the elements of the unknown and mystery, Lex had gone to great lengths. Obsidian was exactly 50,000 acres large, and surrounded by a wall dividing it and the rest of the inn. The wall was not made using formations, but a division tool in the event panel, meaning that it was created using the system's powers. Normally, this would have been enough to ensure Lex that none of the inhabitants within Obsidian would be able to exit it, but since a system was the system's weakness, he further strengthened the barrier through countless formations. If one approached the wall, they would not see what was on the other side, instead they would see an infinite and ever-expanding void so large that it was basically impossible to cross. That was a result of a formation that trapped an infinitely large space within a very small one, so if anyone ever got past the system's barriers, they'd be stuck in an endless void. Of course, there were ways to get by that as well, which is why Lex had many other formations in place as well, all dormant until they were needed. Lex could not hide the fact that Obsidian was a part of the Midnight Inn, nor was that the goal. It wasn't the Midnight Inn that was mysterious, but Obsidian, both for its members and those watching it from the outside. The sky within Obsidian was forever trapped in twilight, though one might expect the theme of Obsidian to have a dark sky. Lex felt that compared to a plain, dark sky, twilight evoked numerous thoughts and emotions. Just looking at the darkness slowly transitioning to light, turning into hues of pink and purple and orange, Lex felt melancholic, and yet at the same time a reverence for the beauty of nature. He felt like within the sky there was a veil between worlds somewhere within those changing colors, and that veil forever blanketed Obsidian. On the ground, Obsidian was formed of thousands of small hills with a sea of clouds filling the valleys, leaving only the very tips of the hills exposed, hiding everything else from view. Let alone eyes, even spirit senses would be unable to probe within the clouds, and if anyone tried to enter the clouds, they would not be stopped. Instead, as soon as they entered deep within the clouds so that they were no longer visible, they'd be teleported to the opposite end of the same hill, making it seem like they were returning to where they came from, but from a different angle. The only way to get from one hill to another was to fly over, or use one of the bridges. Yet if one actually tried to fly, they'd discover that they would be caught in an inescapable force field that pushed them into the sky infinitely until they were teleported to the island once more. So then the only way for them to actually traverse from one island to another would be to use one of the bridges. But the bridges were broken, and on each island there were only 2 stone pillars to mark where the bridges would begin and end. Beyond that, each hill had large, elaborate courtyards built in a Japanese style, arranged to surround a stone temple at the very tip of the hill. On a particular hill, within one of the courtyards, Hargreaves appeared, wearing his most expensive wizarding robes and holding on to a powerful wand. The reason he hadn't used the black key was because he wanted to make preparations before entering some unknown place. He'd learned already that nothing his system gave him was simple, or as it seemed. So while Obsidian sounded like a nice place, there was no guarantee. Hargreaves immediately took stock of his surroundings, and detected no immediate danger, though what he found left him hyperventilating. He was standing under a tree with beautiful, pink petals, falling gracefully to the floor, forming an arch. As it happened, he had teleported right in the middle of the arc. That is not what surprised him. What surprised him was that his system immediately identified each one of those pink petals as a grade 4 treasure. A grade 4 treasure was an item that could only be used by rank 4 wizards and above. Right now, he could not even absorb that treasure if he didn't want to die. According to his system, he needed to be at least in the golden core realm before he could safely absorb even one of those petals, and even then, the medicinal potency of those petals would be so strong that he would need days or weeks to absorb it. Yet here there was an entire tree with tens of thousands of such petals, gently waving in the wind. His system pinged again, identifying the wood of that tree as a grade 5 treasure. But that was only the beginning. His system began to send him notifications one after another, almost going crazy, as it identified items which could help him as a cultivator. The dirt on the ground was of such a high level that his system authority wasn't high enough to identify it. The dew on the blades of grass were counted as grade 3 treasures, while the grass itself was grade 4. There was a path made of stone tiles leading him towards the inside of the building, but his eyes were glued onto the tiles. Just the dye used to color the tiles was grade 5, let alone the tile itself, which his authority was not high enough to identify. Each random flower around him was an earth-shattering treasure that would ignite a war back in the Prometheus Empire, and here, they were merely placed as decorations. When Hargreaves finally saw something grade 2, meaning a grade that he could actually use, he finally lost himself. He immediately used a feature of a system to summon a clone of himself to go probe the treasure, making sure there were no traps. Yet when his projection neared the grain of sand in the Zen garden, the only grain of sand that wasn't grade 3, he discovered that he couldn't pick it up at all. Chapter 1605, Obsidian Sage Eye. System, scan again. Hargreaves said desperately as he looked at the treasure land around him. The air, the dirt, the wind, the dew, all of it had grades he could never hope to get access to in his life, just waiting for him to pick up. Yet no matter what he did, he could not lift it, not put it in his spatial ring, nor withdraw it into his system inventory. New notification: the number of spiritual treasures discovered in host's vicinity are 99 plus. Please collect to advance on your path as a cultivator. Hargreaves began to pant, his eyes turning red as he stared out at the courtyard in front of him. Once he was sure there were no traps around him, he withdrew his clone and activated his strongest technique. The Buddha palm was a technique given to him by the system for completing a quest, and could quell all forces, forcing calmness and stability, getting rid of all anarchic forces. In essence, it could break through defenses, neutralize attacks, and make everything return to its base state. It was an incredibly versatile and powerful technique, and he used it as a secret weapon against other wizards. It was most effective at neutralizing spells, so it had never failed him yet. Hargreaves walked over personally and tried to pick up the grain of sand with the technique active. He felt its rough texture, felt it poke his skin, yet the thing he did not feel was it leaving the ground. Hargreaves helplessly looked around him. It wasn't as if the courtyard was stationary. He could smell the flowers and play with the vines. He could feel the cold dew on his fingertips, but the moment he tried to make use of it, or take it away, it would stop, as if they existed in two different worlds. A painful reluctance filled Hargreaves' heart, but no matter how he tried, he could not take away anything from the courtyard. If the elders of the Prometheus Empire ever saw this place, he had no doubt that the whole civilization would invade it. Of course, Hargreaves had no intentions of sharing this information with anyone, nor would he know how to even if he began. Apparently, not everyone could get the obsidian key. Once he recovered from his mental turmoil, Hargreaves noticed that the courtyard wasn't entirely sealed, and that there was a way to enter into the main building at the head of the courtyard. Hargreaves sighed, bent down and ran his fingers through the sand in the Zen garden, leaving a distinct disruption in the otherwise perfectly raked sandbed. He had no problem, and the sand moved along his fingers. As long as he was not greedy, the sand would do as he wished. He finally let go, and began walking towards the door. At least he had the benefit of not getting sand everywhere this way, which was kinda nice. Doubt and hesitation filled Hargreaves' mind as he entered the building, unsure of what to expect. What he was not expecting, however, was that the building was actually quite cozy, with a small yet comfortable bedroom, a lounge, a quest room and a meditation room. The meditation room required something called MP to use, of which Hargreaves had none at the moment. There were a set of instructions on how to get MP, and though he was curious, he was more attracted towards the quest room. It could be a coincidence that the quest room had the exact same font as the quest tab in his system, and that the quest room radiated an ominous and formidable aura that forced Hargreaves to treat it with reverence. He didn't think so. Yet when he turned the knob, the door didn't open. Instead, a prompt appeared in the air, almost making him mistake it for his own system interface. But it was not. Upon closer inspection, it did not look anything like his system interface at all, and instead was clearly heavily influenced by the theme of Obsidian. He read what the prompt had to say. Dear resident of Courtyard 1126. This message is to inform you that access to the quest room is sealed until you completely accept your membership into Obsidian, and take upon your oath to secrecy. To view the conditions to confirm your membership into Obsidian, and accept or reject them, please make your way to the stone temple on the peak of the hill. Regards. Obsidian Sage. Obsidian Sage was, naturally, the new identity Lex picked for himself within Obsidian. The key to a good mystery was not to have a complete absence of information. Instead, it was to sprinkle small hints of information, and allow everyone to draw up conclusions of their own. Through his identity of Obsidian Sage, Lex would give out quests, manage rewards, and keep Obsidian working in a fair manner for all the members to use. He would never reveal his body, at least if he could help it, nor share any hints of his origin or background. He would, at most, display his power and might to establish himself as the foremost power amongst these fledgling system users. This added a layer of security for the inn as well. If the Midnight Inn suddenly had a special membership exclusively for system users, sooner or later it would be revealed. Then people might wonder if the inn was a system as well. But by creating an enigmatic and powerful figure who ran Obsidian, all attention would be diverted to the being who could make the inn give him the right to establish a special membership. Then, if the presence of a membership for system users was ever revealed, the suspicion of being a system user would not fall on the Innkeeper, but the enigmatic Obsidian Sage, of whom there was little to no information. Hargreaves read the message again and again, ensuring he didn't miss anything. He knew well enough that nothing affiliated with the systems was as it seemed. Though this Obsidian was not technically a part of his system, he couldn't be sure. A part of Hargreaves wanted to exit. Whatever this place was, he was too low-leveled for it. He could always return when he had a higher cultivation, and try his hand then. But he also knew that if he had access to the resources of this place, his cultivation journey would be much easier. Chapter 1606, Obsidian Sage 2. Although this place had shown no danger so far, that did not mean it would remain thus. Hargreaves confirmed once again that he could depart this place with a single thought, and then decided to explore the rest of the area. His cultivation journey would not be easy if he never took a risk, and it wasn't as if his daily life was easy either. Prometheus was not exactly a safe place, and he had enemies of his own with whom he was competing for resources and recognition. If his strength grew stronger than his enemies, then even at home he would only find death. He stepped out of the building and looked out onto the scene of a neat, well-organized small village with numerous courtyards and stone streets. But though there were clearly artificial elements here, nature had not been removed either, for the streets had countless cloud trees growing, filled with colorful flowers and fruits. Just as he was appreciating the sights, a butterfly flew past his face, its fragile wings carrying it up into the air towards the trees. Yet behind the harmless facade, the butterfly radiated the aura of a rank 5 wizard. That meant it was a nascent soul cultivator. A butterfly. Hargreaves' pupils constricted and he nearly teleported out of this place that very instant, for that's when his gaze fell on the countless other wildlife of this place. A family of hummingbirds flew overhead, each of them a golden core cultivator. Far, in the distance, away from the village, an ostentation of peacocks moved through the verdant hills, each of them radiating a power so strong he could not gauge it. Closer by, there was a squirrel at rank 5 and a random brick on the road that had the aura of a rank 4 wizard. Hargreaves would have felt like an ant among giants if only he hadn't seen an ant equal to a rank 3 wizard a whole rank above his. Yet he also quickly noticed that the wildlife lived in harmony, not bothering each other, and not paying attention to him either. This place was a death trap with a ribbon tied atop, making it look cute and friendly. But that did not change that a literal flap of a butterfly's wing could literally kill him. He was caught in his doubt and hesitation when Hargreaves noticed a movement in one of the other courtyards. 3 buildings away from his, the door opened and revealed a beautiful elven girl. She stepped out, her aura perfectly concealed, and took a single glance at everything before casually stepping forward, as if she had no concern. She noticed Hargreaves standing at his door and paused for a moment. But she did not wait long, and simply continued on her path, uncaring about a person who could not step outside his door. Seeing as how no animal bothered her, Hargreaves took a step forward, careful of his surroundings. He wondered if that elven girl was an old member of Obsidian. The way she was so nonchalant about everything here suggested a familiarity. Hargreaves activated a defensive technique, ready to fight back and escape at a moment's notice, before stepping out onto the stone path towards the stone temple. As he journeyed through the hill, he noticed that everything looked so foreign from the world he was used to. There were ponds that seemed to carry stars. There were waterfalls, but instead of falling down they were falling upwards. He even saw a tree that was growing an apple, which was clearly absurd. Everyone knew apples grew trees, but here, things were operating the other way. Through it all, Hargreaves ensured that he kept the elven girl in sight, and followed her up until reaching the stone temple. When he saw her go in without a worry, Hargreaves waited a moment, but decided to follow in. What he did not know was that the elven girl he saw was just an illusion created by Lex. None of the other system users had come just yet, for whatever reason, so he created an illusion to disarm him, and have him hurry up and enter the temple. Instead of seeing the girl once he entered the temple, Hargreaves immediately found himself in a white chamber, devoid of anything save a single, white chair. This was a replica of the room where Lex had undergone the first few procedures for regal embrace, and since the room had made an impact on him, he decided to recreate it for use with these guests. Taking the very obvious hint, Hargreaves sat on the chair, yet the moment he did, he found himself in a dark, foggy conference room. Startled by the sudden change, he jumped up and immediately returned to the white room. Only a moment later, it clicked for him that by sitting on the chair, he could be transported somewhere, but he would only stay there while he sat. Carefully, he sat down again, and this time paid closer attention to the process. Touching the chair did not teleport him. It was only when he was fully seated that his environment would suddenly change. All around him was a thick fog that made it difficult to see, and in front of him was a conference table that seemed to extend into eternity. In the far corner of the table, hidden by a veil of fog, was a blurry figure. "Welcome to Obsidian," said a deep, powerful voice, crashing into Hargreaves' very soul. "I am the Obsidian Sage. Allow me to introduce this place to you. Once you've heard the details, you can decide if you want to take the oath of secrecy, or give up your membership to Obsidian. Be warned, this will be your only opportunity to enter. If you choose to reject, you will be allowed to return to where you came from, but Obsidian will forever be close to you. Now, before we begin, is there anything you want to ask?" Chapter 1607, Sage 3. Hargreaves nervously looked at the vague figure behind the fog, his mind racing. He didn't know how many questions he had available to him. What if the figure stopped answering after the very first question? What should he ask? Should he ask about the purple of Obsidian? Should he ask about what benefits this place had? Or should he ask why the shadowy figure was so large and so oddly shaped? As a chihuahua, Hargreaves was much smaller, and way too differently shaped than the shadowy figure. Ultimately, he decided to be as generic as possible with his question, so that he could get the longest answer. "What's the purpose of Obsidian?" Hargreaves asked. "Obsidian's purpose is deep and beyond your current comprehension," the figure answered. "What matters more is how it affects you. Obsidian is a place of absolute secrecy, where a selected few have been brought to avail the opportunity of a lifetime. resources, techniques, powers beyond your imagination, all are available to you. All you need for any of them is to accumulate quest points. You can attain quest points, QP, by completing quests within the quest room. Using your points, you can even assign quests for others to complete. Nothing in Obsidian will ever be mandatory, yet almost nothing in Obsidian can be done without QP. The meditation room is the only exception. The figure paused for a brief moment. Everything Lex had described so far was, more or less, available inside the inn as well through one service or another. The difference, then, was that Obsidian would have a few, exclusive services that could not be availed at the inn. Instead of relying on the system, those services would rely on him. Before learning more about Obsidian, you must swear the oath of secrecy. As long as you uphold the oath, you can remain a member of Obsidian. Breaking the oath offers no consequence save the greatest consequence of losing access to Obsidian. If you are ready, you can read the oath in front of you. If you do not wish to take the oath, then depart Obsidian, and treat it as a passing dream. An illusory page appeared in front of Hargreaves, with words written in a language he had never seen before, yet he could somehow read it as if he had grown up on it. Hargreaves read the oath time and time again, and once he was sure he understood what it meant, he decided to take the oath. It was a risk. It was a huge risk. But there could never be any reward without risk. Donning a solemn expression, Hargreaves read from the page. By the weight of my soul and eternal twilight of Obsidian, I swear, never shall I speak of Obsidian, nor of sage Obsidian, to any who dwell beyond the shrouded fold. Should rumor or shadow leak into the world, I shall neither confirm nor deny, but remain as stone before the storm. I shall not reveal my place among the hidden, nor shall I lay bare my true name or face, even to those who stand beside me in the dark. I shall not force nor coerce another to tread the path of peril, nor shall I reveal whether by my own hand a quest was ever cast into the black. Upon this vow I stake my honor, my memory, and my breath, and should I betray it, let the gates of Obsidian be sealed to me, and let my name be stricken from its hidden ledgers, now and forever. The oath was pretty straightforward, as Hargreaves understood it. It basically stated that he could never reveal details of Obsidian or the Sage to anyone who was not a member. If information did leak somehow, perhaps through another member, he could not confirm nor could he deny it. It was best not to comment on it at all. He could never reveal his identity as a member, at least on purpose, and he could not reveal his identity to other members. He also couldn't force others to accept quests, nor could he reveal it if he had completed a quest. If he were to break the oath, he would lose his membership to Obsidian. Truth be told, the oath did not seem so harsh, nor did it seem too difficult. He was almost beginning to think that it wouldn't be too severe of a loss if he lost his membership either. If he ever felt like being a member of Obsidian was too much, he could just break the oath and be done with it. Of course, he didn't want to lose access to all the resources here, but as long as he grew a few ranks, he'd be in a much better position then. But to get any of the resources here, he'd need QP, and for that he'd need to complete quests if he understood things correctly. He doubted quests would be easy to do. Hargreaves turned to look towards the shadowy figure, but discovered it was gone. He was alone in that dark place, so all he could do was stand up and return to the White Room. Upon his return there, he discovered that an exit door had been added to the White Room, allowing him to leave. Curious about the quests, which seemed like an integral function of this place, Hargreaves quickly returned to his courtyard, noticing a number of other members warily standing on their doors like he had a while ago. Ignoring them for now, he quickly returned and entered his respective quest room to take a look at the quests. The highest-ranked quest available was a quest to submit a method to teleport items to a place called Abaddon. Apparently, it was a quest set by someone in Courtyard 1 and rewarded 10,000 QP. There were a number of other quests as well, such as submitting new information about various empires and cultivation systems, but they usually only gave 1 or 2 QP. While going through the quests, Hargreaves glanced at some of the services he could redeem using his QP and froze. Right there, on the very top, was a service that cost 100,000 QP. It simply read, "Upgrade your system by 1 rank." Hargreaves froze, the blood in his veins going cold. That was a service provided by the sage, which meant the sage, he knew about his system and could even upgrade it. Chapter 1608, VAN. While Lex rested in his recovery pod, and oversaw Obsidian, Little Blue, Fenrir and Malfoy had secretly entered the jungle. The periphery of the jungle was pretty easy to get through. Fenrir's stealth worked perfectly, and with Little Blue guiding the way towards the call he was getting from Mr. and Mrs. Big Fat Guy, they avoided many obstacles. Yet that was only the periphery. After crossing about 10,057 Walmarts worth of distance, the jungle started to become thicker, not only in vegetation, but in the number of insects and vital energies as well. It was as if everything in this jungle was specifically designed to carry as much vitality as possible, so much so that each insect was like a walking tonic. Fenrir licked his lips and resisted the urge to hunt himself a small snack. This was not the time or place, especially because each creature now was much stronger. Although Lex's cultivation pulled up Fenrir's, the pup was nowhere near the peak of the Earth immortal realm. Even though his personal strength and numerous bloodline abilities afforded him combat power above his level, he could do nothing against hundreds or thousands of immortal insects. Not everyone was broken like Lex or Z. The truth was, the dangers of the jungle were not limited to the insects alone. Even the trees felt threatening to Fenrir, forcing him to behave, and don an expression of seriousness that even convinced Malfoy that the evil twin wasn't plotting anything. But sometimes, one did not need to plot anything for something to go awry. After crossing another 12 Mount Everest's worth of distance, Fenrir's stealth began losing its effectiveness. There was something in the air that nullified his divine ability, and made the three of them visible. After that, they had to be much more careful and mindful with their approach. Fortunately, that's where Malfoy was able to help out. He was much more skilled in conventional stealth techniques than the other two, and guided them to move through the shadows, touching not even the ground, yet leaving behind not even passing wind as they ventured ever deeper into the forest. But when they crossed 17 Big Ben's worth of distance, Malfoy began to frown. He was good at stealth and scouting, but their journey was too smooth, so much so that his skill and ability could not justify it. He looked once more towards Fenrir, wondering if the evil twin had a deeper plot that he had missed. Yet his loyalty test told him that the twin was still loyal, and had not acted to betray them, so he turned his attention back to the forest. They could not afford a single mistake. Soon, the jungle stopped making sense and it was difficult to even know what they were supposed to be hiding from. At some point, without them realizing, the ground had turned upside down, aligned with the sky. Where the ground was supposed to be was a blend of colors, all different shades of green. Trees grew from the air and the dirt floated in patches. Bedrock and deeper layers of soil were gathered together in the shape of more trees, and fruits walked around like busy citizens of a flourishing city. A haze covered the three, clouding their minds, not to intoxicate them, but to protect their fragile minds from cracking as they entered into a zone of fragmented reality, where the fundamental building blocks, the 8 ruling laws of the universe, did not work properly. This specific zone, the zone where laws ceased working properly and reality was so fragmented that a proper working mind would break upon encountering it, was a protective barrier dividing the outer forest from the true depths of the forest. The trio, being in a hazy state, never realized when they entered it, and similarly never realized when they exited it. Their memories were perfectly cut out so that they had no recollection of the experience, nor did their spirits detect the anomaly. All they knew was that one moment they were searching through the ever-increasingly dangerous forest, and the next moment they had reached their destination. An unusually shaped hill, covered in pure white grass, appeared in front of them, and the call that Little Blue was hearing was coming from within. "This is much too easy," Malfoy warned, his experience warning against easy victories. "This has to be some kind of trap." Fenrir turned and looked at the hill with an odd expression. To him, it didn't look much like a trap. Rather, as he observed the white hill as a whole, it looked more like a large van to him. Just as Fenrir had that thought, a vertical line appeared within the hill, and a rectangular portion of the hill was slowly pushed outwards, before sliding off to the side, revealing a long, darkened corridor. A sweet, almost alluring voice whispered in Little Blue's ears, Do you want something yummy? The voice asked. I have just the thing for you. All you need to do is enter the Vern descending nest, VAN, and I'll give it to you. Little Blue was tempted. Little Blue was really tempted, but it knew better than to just wander off randomly while it was still outside the inn. Little Blue looked at Fenrir pleadingly, as if asking permission to go inside the VAN. Fenrir sniffed the air, and used many of its bloodline techniques to detect any danger. Yet it detected nothing. He turned to look at Malfoy, but the mercenary was extremely doubtful. I think we should turn back and report our findings, Malfoy said. No sooner had he said that a powerful force emerged from the opening in the VAN and grabbed a hold of the three, pulling them in. The force also had some kind of spirit dampening effect, causing them to react too slowly, or else they might have been able to resist. The next thing they knew, they had been pulled in, and the opening closed in behind them. Yet, just as they crossed the opening boundary of the VAN, a secret, spiritual link Lex had left on the three of them was extracted from their bodies and left behind, severing Lex's ability to detect what was happening with them. Chapter 1609, Particular Set of Skills. The exact moment that the spiritual links detached from the three, they combined together to form a single light, which then transformed into a projection of Lex. The projection had no power whatsoever, not even an aura. After all, it was not even a cloning technique, but rather a technique to keep track of his targets. That did not change the fact that Lex could remotely use the projection to understand what was happening. All Lex saw was the three of them get pulled into the VAN and the opening close behind them. A spiritual sense emerged from the white hill and covered Lex, as if observing him, just as he observed the hill. Countless thoughts ran through his head, and Lex even confirmed that he was unable to summon Fenrir back to his location, before he turned his attention to the spiritual sense observing him. I don't know who you are, Lex said, his voice deep and slow. I don't know what you want. If you are looking for ransom, I can tell you I don't have any spare souls on me. But what I do have are a very particular set of skills I have acquired over a very long career, skills that make me a nightmare for people like you. If you let my friends go now, that'll be the end of it. I will not look for you, I will not pursue you. But if you don't, I will look for you, I will find you, and I will kill you. Lex did not show impatience or anxiety at the disappearance of the three as he spoke, nor did he try to display any threatening body language. He remained perfectly calm as he wanted for a response. Good luck, finally the spiritual sense said, before crushing Lex's projection. Within his recovery pod, Lex opened his eyes. He had genuinely tried to resist entering the jungle and focus on healing instead, but it seemed that it was impossible. He exited the recovery pod and left the castle. With Z and Luther taking care of protection, the castle would be safe. Yet the three scouts needed his help. With a single step he reached the edge of the forest, and another one led him past the periphery. Instead of using stealth, Lex simply withdrew all his aura, and concentrated domination onto his skin. He would not hide from anyone, yet with his aura withdrawn he would be tough to find anyway. If he was detected by anything, the strength of his domination would deter any aggression. If even that failed, and they decided to get in his way, Lex would not spare them. Although Little Blue was now officially a member of the inn, he was first and foremost the Galactic Sovereign Turtle's pet. Should anything happen to him, Lex couldn't say what the consequences would be, and he didn't want to find out either. But as Lex followed the path that the three of them had taken, he soon arrived at the border of where reality had broken. The only problem was, unlike Fenrir and the others who fell into a daze that protected their minds, Lex maintained complete mental clarity. Passing through that barrier would be a challenge, even for him. Much to his immense surprise, Fenrir discovered that within the White Hill was another jungle. This was the innermost layer of the jungle, hidden from the outside through the use of reality-breaking barriers, insect hordes, and more. It was as if, even within a place as hidden in Abaddon, someone or something had taken great effort to hide a huge secret. Now, the three of them had reached the innermost layer of the jungle, but that didn't necessarily mean that they had reached anywhere near the secret at all. The trio looked around at their surroundings, filled with much more ordinary-looking trees. their size not nearly as towering as those outside. There was a soft, warm breeze flowing through the humid air, and regular, mortal flies and mosquitoes flew around. The scene was very unnerving, though the trio did not understand why. "Come to the lake, dearie," said Mrs. Big Fat Guy, her voice now audible to all of them. "Just follow the path. I have a snack ready for you, and I can prepare something for your friends as well." The trees moved aside, revealing a dirt path for them to follow. They didn't really have much of a choice, so the trio followed the path, though they prepared themselves to use their greatest abilities. Yet as they walked down the path, it slowly became abundantly clear that they were hopelessly outmatched. They felt a soft aura wrap itself around them, protecting them as they walked through the forest. At first they were confused. Why would they need protection, and from what? The answer soon became clear when they came across a massive, white bone jutting through the ground, reaching farther up into the sky than they could see. The bone gave off an aura they had all felt before, and an aura they all recognized. It was the aura of a Tao Lord. In front of them was a bone, jutting out of the ground, that once belonged to a Tao Lord. The aura that was wrapped around them was protecting them from the influence of the Tao. In front of such a thing, all three of them became very timid, walking slowly past it lest something go wrong. Yet their 30-minute detour did not grant them any reprieve from the horrors, for they encountered another, equally large bone. As they walked past one bone after another, Little Blue suddenly came to a realization. Much like how the galactic sovereign turtle used bodies to fertilize its garden, these bones belonging to Tao Lords were fertilizing the forest, allowing it to grow ever stronger and full of more and more vitality. Fortunately, the lake that they were supposed to head towards appeared soon, so that they were spared from the burden of learning secrets they dared not learn. Unfortunately, the lake, which seemed larger than most oceans, too carried some bones. But the thing was, these bones were far enough in the distance that the trio could make out the shape of the thing it belonged to. Chapter 1610, Perfection is a Flaw. Fenrir and Malfoy looked towards Little Blue, a sudden realization filling them. Little Blue, on the other hand, was suddenly filled with a sadness that came from its very core. It was suddenly reminded of that fateful day that human fisherman hunted down his family, sparing only Little Blue because he was too small, or more realistically, because he swam through the golden doors of the Midnight Inn. Tears welled in the corner of his eyes as those feelings returned, just as intense and sore as the day it felt them. "Hush, little one. There is no need to cry," said Mr. Big Fat Guy softly, his voice coming from the skeleton of a massive Kuan Pung partially submerged within the lake. But the more he tried to console Little Blue, the more he began to cry. From the bones, Little Blue could sense a feeling of warmth and closeness that reminded it of the family it had lost. "Do not stop him from crying," Mrs. Big Fat Guy said softly. "Let him vent his feelings. I can feel, in the very core of his soul, a sorrow he has buried deep. This way, he can finally let go." Fenrir, who heard everything so far, bowed deeply to the distant bones, as if expressing his deepest gratitude towards the bones. "Come, little one. The gift I have for you is one of the lost legacies of our people. Absorb it, and allow it to once more grace Valen with its presence." Mrs. Big Fat Guy spoke a name, yet the three of them heard nothing. It was as if their existence could not tolerate the knowledge of the name, and so to protect them, shut down entirely. The three of them collapsed, yet they did not fall. A soft power wrapped itself around them, and slowly lifted them into the air and brought them towards the skeleton in the lake. Far, in the distance, there were countless other skeletons, just as powerful, and just as massive as the one in the lake, each one of them giving off a power so vast it could shock even those living today in the universe. "Their friend is trying hard outside," said a third voice, speaking to the skeleton in the lake. "Will you reward him as well?" "He cultivates a power from beyond Valen," Mr. Big Fat Guy answered. "Not to mention, he hides within his soul one of those broken toys. He will find no heritage here." "Yes, but even if his cultivation is foreign, his origins are not. Nor has he absorbed the system into his soul. He even bears the mark of the Tower of Providence, and in his mind I feel the aura of an old, forgotten friend. He is the perfect agent to receive a heritage." Perfect itself is the ultimate flaw. He will get nothing, speak of this no more. At most, if he can manage to enter the inner jungle, I will reward him with knowledge that he seeks. A hush fell onto the land, and no one questioned Mr. and Mrs. Big Fat Guy. Perhaps a reward of any kind was more than enough, and getting a heritage was never their objective to begin with. After all, there are some destined to create their own legacies, instead of continuing on what already exists. In the meantime, the trio were flown over to the skeleton of the Kuan Pung. Little Blue flew right to the forehead, while Fenrir and Malfoy were carried to the back. A soft, blue light entered their bodies, beginning to change not only their body and soul, but transmitting to them ancient knowledge forgotten across the universe. Outside the jungle, in the castle walls of the Midnight Castle, the entire Midnight and staff stood solemnly. Behind the walls, Cayman and all of the mercenaries stood as well. It couldn't be helped. So far, they had seen a lot in Abaddon. Now, though, they were seeing things that they had no business seeing. Armies, not just of locusts, but of wraiths and chimeras and monstrosities far more dangerous, had gathered all over the horizon. Their strengths were not limited to just the mere Earth immortal realm. Instead, all realms seemed to be present, including demi-Dao lords and actual Dao lords. The only redeeming factor was that these armies weren't looking at the castle. Instead, they were looking at the jungle. If there was to be a fight, they would not survive. There was nothing any of them could do to protect themselves, and even Z did not believe that Lex could somehow save them. Of course, just because death was inevitable did not mean that Luther took things easy. No, he was the Innkeeper's assistant, even if many forgot that. Something like death would not deter him. This castle was not designed to move, he said softly from the throne where he sat, his voice reaching every one of those inside. So we must move the very ground that surrounds it. Assume your positions. Neither death nor failure is acceptable. The armies of hellhounds and wraiths began to form, and around each one of them was a chain that seemed to fuse into the very ground around the castle. Countless formations activated within the castle, and countless techniques began to flow out of its walls, some targeting the ground, and some targeting the air. The earth groaned, but then it broke free as a large chunk of land around the castle stayed solid, pulled out from the very ground. The two armies began to drag the castle towards the jungle, their only hope, as the abominable armies continued to grow on the horizon. Among the members of the army, there appeared a single addition who was different from the rest. Instead of staring at the forest, the Black Knight stared at the castle, being dragged away from him. "Run while you can," he murmured. "Your time is running out." Though the Black Knight's gaze was fixed on the escaping castle, he did not try to give chase. He could not break ranks, nor could he venture forth before the army. The battle between the jungle and Abaddon was as old as time itself. It had continued without change since eternity, and it would likely continue for all of eternity as well. He was not foolish enough to get involved in something like that even if he had already died once before. There was no guarantee of what would happen next time,